Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Nucleus Investment Insights. Today's episode is called Hacked, an investment look at IT security. With a wave of cybersecurity attacks and incidents over the last few years, it's a topic on everyone's mind. With the rise of AI, individuals and businesses need to be ever more vigilant as the hackers are getting even more sophisticated. Today, we have an industry expert, Patrick Gray from Risky.BIZ It, to talk about all things cybersecurity, what to be wary of, how to protect yourself, and of course, we'll talk about the investment opportunities and implications. Just a quick reminder, this podcast is general advice only and is not intended to be specific to your personal financial situation. If you do want to discuss your personal financial situation and how to improve that, you can book a call with me or one of the advice team at nucleuswealth.com. Today, as always, we have Nucleus Wealth's Chief Investment Officer, Damien Klassen. Damo, welcome.
Hey, Sam.
Hey, Damo. As mentioned in the intro today, we also have a special guest, Patrick Gray, who has a cybersecurity podcast, and he's been a cybersecurity journalist since 2001, before it was even called cybersecurity, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Excellent. So, Patrick, would you like to, if you could just give the listeners a bit of background about your podcast, and why it's this sector's captured your interest for such a long time, just so they can get a bit of a feel for who you are.
Yeah, well, I guess in high school, a long time ago, a million years ago, I had a bunch of friends who were interested in computer hacking and whatnot, and that's where my interest came from. And amazingly enough, decades later, it's still an interesting discipline. So I first started reporting on this stuff as a journalist in the early 2000s and just stuck with it. And around 2006, 2007, I sort of got sick of writing about cybersecurity for people who weren't in the field. So I founded a weekly podcast called Risky Business, which is really just for people who work in cybersecurity, law enforcement, intelligence. And I've been doing that ever since. And it was just me for a very long time. And these days, we're a niche media company there's about 5 of us now. And we do a bunch of, newsletters and podcasts all about cybersecurity for people in cybersecurity. And the audience is, the company's based in Australia, but the audience is definitely global. About 85% of the audience is based outside of Australia, over half in the United States. And, that's what we do.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. My name's Sam Kerr. I'm the Senior Financial Advisor at Nucleus Wealth. In full disclosure, Patrick is a client of Nucleus Wealth. I just thought I'd better add that in. We are live every Thursday at 12:30 Australian Eastern Time. So jump onto the Nucleus Wealth YouTube channel and you can ask any questions that come to mind, and we'll do our best to answer them during the show. And for those of you that don't know, Nucleus Wealth is also a super fund, and we're currently offering a free, no obligation super review. In that review, we'll give people clarity on how you're actually invested and whether that's appropriate. We'll look at the fees and make sure you're not paying too much, and also have a look at the tax saving opportunities on offer. So you can book in via the description there. So yeah, that's the intros done. So Damo, over to you to get the ball rolling.
Yeah. So where I sort of wanted to approach this from is there's been a few pretty high profile hacks in the last couple of years, and share prices get hit pretty hard when it happens. So Medibank, Optus, Latitude, even tech darling Canva got hit a few years ago with data breaches. And so I just wanted to, I thought well worth grabbing Patrick on to have a bit of a chat and talk about where the vulnerabilities are. It also seems that there's a been a release of a lot of AI tools and these large language models that sort of allow scammers in particular to sort of clean up their language a bit more, and so you can't rely on spelling mistakes and half broken English to alert you to clear scams. Is that where the vulnerabilities might lie and what and what we're seeing done to protect us. So I might start. Where should we start? We start with the AI and I guess the casual scammers.
Well, I mean, I just want to start off by mentioning something, which is that data breaches don't tend to have a lasting impact on share prices, which is something that I mean, for a long time, the security industry would always say, oh, you've got to invest in securing your infrastructure and all of your data and your services because you've got to think about reputational risk and you've got to think about the risk to your share price. I mean, just while you were talking, I brought up Medibank's share price, and it is about where it was immediately prior to the breach.
And we invested after the breach with the view that, look, it's probably one that's going to clean up and sort of stuff out. But I guess this is the issue, isn't it? Is a breach a sign that actually they were unlucky, or is it a breach a sign that there was something endemically wrong? And I guess it's multiple breaches would certainly, you'd think, start to put a few dents.
It really depends, right? Like it really does depend. It's entirely possible. I'm sure there's going to be some sort of review of what happened at Medibank at some point. It's entirely possible that they had appropriate controls and just got unlucky. I do believe that the attackers who hacked into Medibank attempted to ransomware the company but didn't succeed. So in that regard, they actually scored a win, but unfortunately a whole bunch of very private data was exfiltrated from them. But I mean, really there's two major threats that are impacting business at the moment. One is ransomware and data extortion, which I'd sort of group together under the same loose heading. This is where you've got criminal organizations, usually based in Russia, and their affiliates. They come and hack into a company, they steal data, they try to deploy ransomware, and then they will ransom the companies to say, hey, if you want to be able to use your computers again, you need to give us $20 million. And, if they can't deploy ransomware, they'll often just hold the data and say, well, if you don't want us to release your data onto the internet, you'll have to pay us. So that's one very big crime type.
Okay, so just to clarify for listeners and for myself as well, to make sure I'm getting this right. So the ransomware is, I've locked off a bunch of files that you really need to run your business and encrypted them, and you can't get it back. And if you send me this money, I'll send you the keys to let you back in.
Yeah. Basically, yes. I mean, ransomware, once it's deployed onto a computer, renders that computer inoperable. So the operational impact from a ransomware attack is devastating, which is why so many people will pay to be able to end a ransomware incident.
Yeah, and so and I guess from this perspective, it's talking about if you can get into a vast number of computers that people have, or I suppose get into some of their servers. But I guess in terms of backups, is this a sort of, does ransomware sort of infect your backups as well? Because it's, you hear some people who are like, well, I lost a couple of days of work and then I just went to my backups and we're off and running. So
it depends, right? So some ransomware crews will get into an organization and gradually corrupt backups until they're no longer useful. And I think, if anything, the rise of large-scale ransomware over the last few years has pointed out that a lot of these backup solutions just aren't very good. Right. I mean, they back up your data, but then when you go to restore it, it turns into a project instead of pushing a few buttons. Right. So that's something we've learned. I think, a lot of organizations have really put a lot of effort into building more secure, reliable, robust backups, and that's why we see now that some ransomware group will gain access to some network. You'll see a bit of news about it where they isolated some systems and restored from backup, and they got back up and running. So it is certainly possible to win in these situations, but I don't know, quite often you'll have attackers who have persistent access to the environment and they just come back and do it again.
There's no winners. It's just degrees of loss, isn't it?
I mean, you find that there are organizations out there that are well positioned to not have to really worry about this stuff so much. I mean, you think about sectors that have been historically very attacked, like banking. For example, I think the chance of a major bank in Australia being ransomware is very slim. So it can be done. It's just expensive and requires a lot of work.
Yeah. I guess that's where I'm leading to with this is that so we've got a ransomware one, and then you've got I've got your customer data and some sensitive data, and if you don't let me, if you don't pay, then I'm going to release it to and obviously there's the issue with that is that will they just come back again for another bite in 6 months' time and 12 months' time, or whatever.
Well, funnily enough, these criminal groups actually have a fairly decent track record of doing what they say they're going to do. And that's because credibility is important if you're operating a shakedown like this. If you get a reputation as someone who takes the money and then either comes back and asks for more or doesn't hold up your end of the bargain, people will just stop paying. And already the rate of people who pay to have their data deleted is not as high as the rate of people who will pay to render their computers functional again because of that operational impact. So that's a couple of crime types there that I grouped together in one. Yeah. And the other one is business email compromise.
Right. Okay. Let's get back to let's go those. Okay. So because on these ones I'm thinking through, I guess what I'm going is, okay, if I'm running something where it's not particularly time sensitive, then the ransomware is less of an issue than if I've got my operational systems that, people are hitting all day long. And so I guess what I'm saying is, if you're if all my salespeople all got their CRMs hacked and they can no longer get into, they can no longer call clients and chase up new leads. If I'm saying, okay, I'm waiting a week or two and then I'm back up and running, is like, well, that's not as much of an issue as if I've got lots of live time systems that people are accessing, and as you said, say a bank or whatever, that where I've got those risks straight away. And then the flip side, and then the other part is that the ransomware. Well, if we're only storing emails and names of whatever it is, corporate clients, then that's not as much of an issue as if we've obviously got tax file numbers and credit card details and all that type of personal data. So I guess as a sort of looking through companies and trying to isolate which are the big risks, I suppose, in terms of say you're a manufacturing company, it would seem to be that unless you're sort of particularly hooked up everything sort of into the you've got all your production systems also on machines that have also been compromised. And I guess what your thoughts are around, I guess, where you're seeing the most, which are the sectors that you'd look from an investment perspective and go, these are the most at risk from say a ransomware attack?
So anyone can be a victim of a ransomware attack. And this is because, thanks to cryptocurrency, it's now possible to get paid a ransom, right? There's no KYC requirement on Bitcoin. So this has enabled a whole bunch of crimes, and ransomware is certainly one of them. So really, the way that you looked at that, maybe our salespeople lose access to their computers. More realistically, a ransomware attack against your organization will affect every computer at your organization, and people won't be able to do anything. They won't be able to do their work, right? So the operational impact is quite devastating. But you're right, these groups tend to go after organizations that have a much more critical need for their computers than others. So hospitals are a absolutely favored target of ransomware crews. I mean, we've seen instances where patient deaths have been linked to outages caused by ransomware at hospitals, particularly in the United States. We've been lucky we haven't seen that here, really, in Australia. Just this month, we saw 2 attacks against casinos in the United States. So MGM and Caesars both had ransomware attacks affecting them. Caesars paid $15 million to get the attackers out of their network. MGM didn't. And MGM, they operate a number of casinos and resorts in Las Vegas. They had a bunch of their slot machines down. The ones that were functional, you had to put cash in them. So there was the card system that enabled their poker machines wasn't working. So people who wanted to cash out of their machines would have to press a button and wait 20 minutes for a staff member to come. And, some of these staff members normally worked in the office, and they're out there with their bum bags full of cash doing pokey payouts. All of the food and beverage ordering was all messed up. The room key system was messed up. So in that case, as I say, MGM didn't pay. They were able to restore, but it would have cost them, millions of dollars. And I mean, probably tens of millions. I guess we get to find out in their SEC filings eventually.
Yep. Okay, so that's your ransomware ones.
Business email compromise.
Business email compromise. Yeah. No, sorry. Actually, before you get to that, so in terms of so we've seen Medibank. So basically, anyone who's storing credit card information is probably the first target. But But in terms of
not
those,
not as much anymore. I mean, credit card numbers are still popular, but that's kind of a legacy prized data set. You know, like these days you've got cryptocurrency exchanges where if you can hack into them, you can just steal the money. You don't then need to bypass anti-fraud systems by processing a bunch of stolen card numbers, because, you know, banks have got pretty good at spotting fraudulent transactions. You know, obviously credit card fraud still exists, but crypto, you steal it, it's gone, right? We saw the biggest attack of the year just happened this week. That was a $200 million USD theft just in one single attack. And we've got entire countries that have dedicated government intelligence agencies to stealing cryptocurrency. So there I'm speaking about North Korea. They steal billions of dollars worth of crypto and funnel it into their nuclear weapons development program. So, you know, crypto, I'd say, would certainly be a bigger target than credit card data. And really these days, it doesn't matter what the data is. If you can get a ransomware into an environment and cause a mess, people will pay to clean up that mess. And when it comes to data extortion, some people pay to save themselves the embarrassment, or there might be stuff in their emails they're worried about regulators seeing, and you know they'll pay, but it's less urgent usually than a ransomware attack that's disrupting operations.
Yeah. And okay, so from this front, we're talking companies that sort of store critical data, and as I guess MBF is probably a reasonable example of, yes, people have a lot of medical information that's, you know, they'd like to keep private, and while there's not a devastating sort of financial effect, it is, you know, immediately for people who have been hacked from that way, there is that, I guess, further identity theft. Then, you know, if the more data you're storing about a person, you know, birth certificates and
the more leverage you've got then over the victim organization, for sure. The more sensitive the data is, the bigger the leverage.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So so that sort of limits, I guess, a lot of people who you know, and I guess, sorry, it also needs to come back to more likely to be consumer information rather than business information, I'm guessing. In that,
not necessarily. We've seen an awful lot of law firms getting targeted. Law firms are actually a preferred target as well. And quite often there's commercial and confidence information held by law firms, where if that is leaked, it's quite disastrous to their clients and to the reputation of the firm. So this, as I say, this affects everyone. You know?
No, I know it does. I guess I'm just trying to get I'm just kind of running through my companies that we're investing in and saying, okay, well, if I've got companies that are, say, mainly business to business, then there might be some commercial stuff that they may or may not want to get out. Sorry, they prefer not to get out there and things like that. But I guess in terms of reputational damage is, if I have to tell all my customers, hey, they've got your passport number and your, you know, and your driver's license numbers out there, you got to go redo all your IDs. That's obviously more concerning than if I'm telling a company that, hey, you know, all those invoices we sent you and, you know, requests and stuff like that might be out there. It's like, well,
sure, but I mean, you know, we've even seen cases historically, like Salesforce got hacked. I mean, this is going back 15 years ago or something. And, you know, they had an intrusion where someone stole a lot of accounts related information, and they used that information to then send malicious invoices to Salesforce's customers that looked like Salesforce invoices and arrived from the correct account, you know, account management person and everything. And then when they opened them, they had malware in them, and you know, they actually managed to steal a bunch of money that way. So, but again, like, you go back to this thing where we just talked about Medibank's share price being back where it was, you know, like it's very unusual for these incidents to cause lasting damage to an organization's reputation or share price. So, which, you know, as someone who's been in security for a long time, I find a little bit depressing, because we always want to see the wicked punished, you know? We want to see the careless people are suffering for their carelessness, but it just doesn't seem to work out that way.
Yeah, well, and I guess it's that, coming back to that, you know, we spoke a little bit about, you know, are we getting to the stage where some of this behavior is being normalized in terms of saying, well, you know, yes, you got hacked, but, you know, people get hacked, so maybe it wasn't your fault.
There's a part of there's a part of that now. Although, I mean, I would not want to be the next Australian health insurer that gets hacked. You know, so I think that's what quite often happens, is you might see some sector being targeted. Right now in the United States, every single company that operates a casino is sitting down with their CISO, asking them what they need.
Right.
That's typically what happens, because no one wants to be the next one.
Yeah.
Because then it looks bad.
Yes. And typically, I guess, I mean, okay, so from that perspective, typically, how long do you think these attacks would go on for, in terms of, what's the prelude to the attack? So that's a great example. Is, they might not want to be the next one, but if these things take a couple of months to sort of play out, is it possible that there's a couple already waiting, ready to go? They just haven't reached the limit, or actually that once these guys are in, they try and go pretty quickly to avoid detection?
Well, I mean, you got to understand something. You got to understand about this whole ecosystem is it's quite fragmented. It's a really interesting business, because you've got these ransomware developers sitting at the top of all of it, and they're the ones who actually create the software that does the encrypting. And they've got a payments platform and everything. So they're like software as a service, basically. But they don't go out and do the attacks and actually deploy the ransomware. That's left up to affiliates. So affiliates are the ones who'll get into a network, identify ways to spread that software all around through the organization and pull the trigger and do that ransomware attack. And even sometimes the affiliates, they're not the ones gaining the first level access to the company in the first place. That goes down to people called initial access brokers. So what you've got is this really complex ecosystem of people with different specialties. And then, beyond that, you've got people who'll handle the money laundering side for you, right? Some more successfully than others, because, the FBI tends to have great visibility into a lot of that stuff. But yeah, it's a really fragmented thing. And, the life cycle of an attack might be some hacker gets access to a large organization. They get some persistent access just to one machine. They talk to their friend who's an initial access broker. They might sell it to that person who then on-sells it. And then all of a sudden you got a ransomware attack. So all of this stuff is constantly going on behind the scenes. And there are a number of organizations that are, penetrated right now that have no idea, where someone could choose to then use that initial entry into an organization to attempt to perform a ransomware attack.
Yep. Okay.
And sometimes it can be a matter of initial entry to full ransomware compromise in like a day. Normally I think it's more like a week or two, but it can happen very quickly.
Right. Okay. Okay. So then so I guess from that perspective, if we're talking about who's going to be the next one, they're probably, if I'd started to hack another casino one, and then I saw that MGM just got done, I'd probably want to accelerate, because I'm like, well, these guys are going to all have everyone's going to start having a look, if you know what I mean.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, that's actually a reasonable thing. Yeah, I would think that anyone who was planning on pulling the trigger on a ransomware incident at a casino at the moment has a fair chance of being detected at the moment, because everyone is looking.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So email interception.
Business email compromise is another one. Now, this, in terms of the money that it earns for criminals, is actually substantially larger than ransomware, but it's not particularly sexy, so it doesn't get as much attention. But essentially what business email compromise is about is someone will hack a email account at a business. So they might do this by doing what we call a brute force attack against that account, just trying different passwords until they get in. Or perhaps the user of that email account has used their email address as a login somewhere and used the same password at like a forum that they're on. They've used the same password that they use for their email, and someone has hacked that forum and has that data. So then you've got that person's username and password. So essentially, someone gains access to a business's email mailbox, and then they get in there and they study, what this business does, and does money fly around and these sorts of things. And then eventually what they'll do is they'll gradually try to work towards having control over an email address that has something to do with accounts. And then they might contact someone that has a business relationship with that company and say, hey, we've updated our bank account details. Next time you pay our invoice, this should be the bank account details. And then, of course, because they have access to those inboxes, they can edit invoices that are going out to people to include those new account details. And the money gets then paid into an account that the attacker controls, and then laundered and exfiltrated into another country, never to be seen again. So this is affecting everyone from, very large companies to really anyone that processes transactions $10,000 and up. Companies that do, sole contractors who do bathroom renovations. If someone gets into their mailbox, they can start, editing the invoices that person sends, and collecting money that is rightfully owed to them. We've seen it, targeting real estate firms and conveyancers and solicitors and just right across the board. We've seen a couple of spectacular ones. There was one. It was quite a while ago now, but it was someone did a business email compromise attack against Facebook and Google. Facebook paid this person $150 million. But obviously they were able to recover that because that's the sort of thing that the FBI tends to respond to when you ring up and say, someone just made off with 150 mil. So in that case, the attacker was the dog who caught the car. But it's still a worthwhile, case study of just how vulnerable we are to information that we email around being manipulated. So business email compromise is an absolutely massive problem.
Yeah, I must admit, it does sound though to me I'm talking from an investor again perspective, it sounds to me more that seems like a low level fraud, sort of consistent, a bit in the same way as if I'm, if I'm a credit card company, I know there's going to be a certain amount of fraud. And I guess what I'm thinking is, as a business, or I'm a retailer, there's going to be a certain amount of theft. It almost seems as if this is a low level one. Obviously, if you're in the business and all that type of stuff, you want to do everything you can to get out of it. But as an investor, it's sort of like something we almost have to accept that this is going to happen at some point.
It can be existential for some of these organizations that are involved. This isn't like a cost of doing business thing. Sometimes these BEC attacks, they get away with a lot of money. And we've seen people in similar types of attacks. I think, what's that conveyancing firm? PEXA? Is that what they're called?
PEXA, yeah.
Yeah, so there was a case where a young family had a bunch of money stolen out of PEXA. And I think it's because it wasn't a business email compromise. In that case, I think it was their accountant's, or their conveyancer's account got compromised or something. And, at the time, PEXA were refusing to cover the loss. Funnily enough, that family just happened to be the most telegenic family you've ever seen in your life.
Right.
So there they are on a current affair, living in a caravan, looking adorable. And as a result of that, the policy changed and they got their money back. And now those sort of accounts, there is some fraud protection. But, you do see absolutely heartbreaking stories of where, people do lose substantial amounts of money in BEC. And, you don't have to be a big business to be transferring around large amounts of money.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. And I guess I don't want to downplay it. As you said, if you're a plumber or as I said, a bathroom contractor and you've just lost 30 grand.
But is this a threat to BHP? Probably not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm going for the bigger companies. It's a persistent, but yeah. Okay, so and the idea now that the AI tools, and we were just talking about just before we were briefly, commenting on that often the AI is not as good as it might be advertised. But I guess there's in our conversation before, you spoke about a lot of the companies involved in security already have AI, and say credit card companies have already been using AI to try and pick up fraud and things like that. And so that's at one side. And I guess really what OpenAI to me has done is sort of democratized or made it easier, I suppose, for other people to access AI. And certainly the scammers and your average Nigerian prince who just wants to transfer his money can probably access some much better terminology and more convincing text from I think AI tends to be relatively good at some of the marketing stuff, some of the stuff that doesn't need to be exactly right, but just needs to sort of feel right. And so yeah, I guess your thoughts on are we going to face a wave of new scams and new problems coming through?
Look, I think the biggest risk from large language models, because that's really what we're talking about here. I mean, we've used we've used AI in security for a long time, but we call it machine learning. right?
Yeah.
And we've used that to do everything from correlating events in logs to tell us when something is going on. That's a very common use. Using machine learning techniques to examine files to see if they might contain previously unknown strains of malicious software or viruses, right? So there's been, we've been using this stuff for a long time. This large language model stuff has just led to absolutely incredible amounts of hype. The direct applications in security are kind of few and far between. So you're right in that scammers already have their own LLMs where people have been able to take some of these models and remove the guardrails from them so that they can be used to do malicious things like generate convincing fraud emails. So that's certainly going to help criminals with the scale and productivity side of things. I'm not sure it's that much of a game changer. On the defensive side, though, you can also, when it comes to processing language that might be involved in fraud attempts and whatnot, you can use this stuff as well to get an indication as to whether something's fraudulent. But it's, this OpenAI stuff, it's computationally expensive. So it's not something you'd really do at scale. So there is a role for it, but it's far from being a game changer. We've seen some interesting little use cases. One of my clients, one of our sponsors, they use ChatGPT to explain things to their customers. So they make a network monitoring tool that generates alerts based on suspicious behavior. And, there might be one, alert that comes out of it. You can, then click on that alert and get a ChatGPT generated description of that alert, why it may have triggered, and the nuances and whatever. So for them, it was just a way to generate a whole bunch of knowledge that they could push into their product. So that was cool. But the OpenAI hype train has just been absolutely amazing to watch. Absolutely amazing, because I think people have thought, oh, this is going to change everything. But I think certainly in security, I don't think it's going to change all that much, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, and look, the stuff I've done with it, in investing, as I said, machine learning's been around for a long time, and there's lots of people have been putting a lot into it. And so, the democratization of machine learning, I think, just means that more people will discover that actually machine learning models aren't particularly good in the stock market. But you've now got a much broader universe.
Well, I'm sure you've got a bunch of models that occasionally will give you a signal and say something funny's happening over here, and that's what ML's useful for, right? It's the exact same use case as security. It's just your inputs are different. You're looking at market signals. We'd be looking at network and computer-based signals of things that are happening on our networks and in our computers. But it's essentially the same thing, which is something unusual is happening, which is what you want to know as someone who's in the markets, and it's what you want to know as someone who's responsible for securing computers as well. Yeah,
exactly. Whereas if you're somebody who says, I'm just going to rely on that signal to go and buy and sell things, you quickly find that the historical signals are
it's a great way to earn a small fortune if you're starting with a big one, I'd imagine.
Yes, that's right. Sorry, that did lead me to something that I was thinking through on that.
Damo, we're just going to go to a quick sales message. We'll be back with the investment insights very shortly. Nucleus Wealth is an active and passive investment manager. If you like what you're hearing and want some help with your investing, we can do it for you via our active portfolios. Our tactical and core portfolios use the insights shared in this podcast to construct and manage your investment. We blend tactical portfolios to offer our combinations of international shares, Australian shares, government bonds, and cash. We vary the asset allocation with the goal of protecting your capital in times of market uncertainty. We also have active international and Australian share portfolios. These are chosen using our quality and value investment philosophy. You can find out more at nucleuswealth.com. Now back to the show.
So the other sort of extension that I wanted to talk about then was the idea then of some of these models now that are generating both voice and I guess early stages of video where I guess it's a responsive enough that you can sort of if you're fast enough typer, you could and you're happy for the person at the other end of the phone to be slightly delayed in terms of responses, you can make a voice sound not like yours, or more in particular like somebody else.
Yeah.
If there's voice things out there.
Yeah,
So,
voice-based authentication is dead.
Mm.
I mean, it's deader than dead. It is completely dead. Its ashes have been scattered. The service has been held. It's done.
Yeah. Yes.
And I mean, but you're hitting on something interesting here, right? Which is that a lot of the issues with this generative AI stuff, it's more around content than, hacking. So we're going to be seeing absolute deluges of computer-driven and computer-generated content just kind of polluting the internet. I think recently, if you put, and they fixed it, Google fixed this, but if you put countries in Africa starting with K into Google, sometimes you put a question into Google and it gives you an answer up the top. It's pulled it out and highlighted it.
Yeah.
And the answer was some absolute gibberish that was indexed based off a ChatGPT output that someone had prompted and then put on a web page, and then Google indexed it, and it said there are no countries in Africa that start with K except for Kenya, which sounds like it starts with a K but does not start with K. So this is the sort of nonsense that we're going to be dealing with, because clearly what someone has done is generated a whole bunch of content, stuck it on the internet. Now it's being indexed by Google. And so really, I mean, it's not so much an issue now, but imagine 5 years from now, when you're going to try to research something, you go and research it. How do you know what you're looking at had any diligence applied to it whatsoever, or is just ChatGPT output? Same goes for images. AI-based image generators are terribly convincing now. How do you know what's a real image and what's fake?
Yeah.
I mean, I think right now there's one of the top, I saw this, I think it's the top result in Google Images for Tank Man is an AI-generated selfie of the Tank Man in Beijing taking a photo of himself in front of the tank. And it looks real, So I think there's going to be some challenges there in terms of, misinformation, disinformation, and just knowing what's real and what's not. So, that's the stuff that I'm more worried about, is just these tools' ability to generate massive amounts of content and push them out all over the place.
Well, that's the part I guess I was leading to with that voice part, is that, it's the... most kids are alive and well on TikTok and social media and videos of themselves out there, and you work out who the parents are, and you grab the voice recording, and it's a phone call to say, hey, I'm stuck wherever, can you send me this much money?
Yeah.
Let me flick my bank account, and if they ask questions, and you can respond back, and
But I mean, we've seen people do that already with compromised Facebook accounts, right? So you compromise someone's Facebook account, work out who their parents are, and then message them and say, "Hey, you got to give me a credit card number. I'm in a jam. I can't talk right now. My phone's out of service or whatever." And and that's the thing. It's just
but it's much more
step along. It's iterative.
It's much more convincing if it's a phone call.
It is. I grant you that. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and so so from your perspective, I mean, there was an initial sort of thought as well that there were going to be all these other AI tools, and so it's sort of like going to be the scammers deploy their AI, and then I deploy my AI to try and work out whether the scammer's one's real or not. But it sounds like it sounds like we're getting enough realism from these ones. It's just going to be very hard to tell.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're using OpenAI to tell you whether or not something is probably OpenAI generated, like, I don't know, it's just, there's better ways currently to identify fraudulent mail, particularly when you're operating at scale. So do you need to deploy an AI to fight an AI? I don't know. I mean, we just have to imagine that these criminals speak better now, and sort of act accordingly. But we haven't really relied on bad spelling to detect email fraud. On the industry side, at least, we haven't really relied on that in a long time. It's just going to make it a little bit more convincing to the user. But the challenge for the industry is to detect, when those emails shouldn't be going to users, or detect when there's been a compromise in someone's account.
Yep. And so in terms of identification, there are ways. You spoke a little bit about tokens. Maybe do you want to sort of run through, I guess, what's the latest and greatest in terms of identification?
Yeah,
process?
so in terms of authentication technologies, I'd imagine most people would be familiar by now with the concept of multi-factor authentication. And what that means is, for plenty of people, when they want to log into a, certain account, they enter their username, their password, they press login, and then they get sent, a one-time code via SMS that they then have to enter into the website in order to grant them access. And that means that if someone steals their username and password, it's of limited use because they also need to steal their phone number. Now, unfortunately, stealing people's phone numbers is actually not that hard. You can walk into, particularly in the United States, it's called SIM swapping. And essentially you can say, oh, I lost my phone. I need a new SIM card. This is my number. Here's my address. Or, oh, no, I left my ID in the car. Sorry, But quite often you can get
it was with my phone that got lost here.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, SMS-based authentication is only so effective. But there's been a lot of work done in security over the last, I don't know, probably I think 5 to 8 years on a technology called WebAuthn. And what that is essentially some very high quality plumbing for robust authentication. And it's manifested, I guess the example of this that most people would be familiar with is going to be passkeys, which is a relatively new feature on iPhones and I believe Android devices as well. And passkeys rely on this underlying technology called WebAuthn, which essentially makes it impossible to phish someone, right? Because the authentication, it's like I'm going to lose your audience if I really get into the nitty gritty of how it works, right?
Yep.
But basically, there's a bunch of clever cryptography involved, and you can only authenticate to the service. You can't accidentally authenticate through a malicious third party, which is how phishing often works. Even with these one-time codes, people can still phish them because if you're on a page controlled by an attacker, you're entering your one-time code into their page, and in the background, they're just passing it along with your username and password and getting access. You can't do that with passkeys. So these are going to be a big thing that people use. I mean, another manifestation of those is hardware security keys like YubiKeys, which some people listening may have heard of. But they use that FIDO2 sort of technology, which is what backs WebAuthn as well. So there's a lot of work being done on that. But there is a big but here. Your authentication is only ever as good as the procedure for resetting it is.
Right.
So you might have the best multi-factor authentication in the world. So, I spoke earlier about how Caesars Palace and MGM got hacked this month. The way they got hacked is someone rang up their help desks. They already had the username and the passwords for their what's called their super admin accounts in their Okta. And then these are the accounts that run the whole organization. So somehow they obtained the username and password for those accounts, but they had robust MFA enabled. So they just rang the help desk and asked them to reset it, and they did.
Right.
And this is the problem. So how do you fix that? And a lot of thought has to go into that. And it's a big challenge for large organizations that deal with a lot of people is how do you have robust procedures for doing things like swapping SIM cards to, issuing a new SIM card or disabling multi-factor when someone says, oh, I lost my phone or I lost my hardware security key. So, this is the thing about security that I think people from outside the discipline might not understand is that, there's no easy fixes here. There's no easy fixes. It's a complicated discipline with a lot of moving parts. A lot of it is about trade-offs. A lot of it is about accepting certain types of risks. So there's no absolute solutions here. And as much as I'd love to sit here and say, oh, but we've made tremendous progress, it's true in a way, but we also keep changing the way we do IT. Big push into clouds and software as a service. And, those bring with them new security challenges. Sometimes they look quite a lot like the old security challenges, but you need entirely new tooling and approaches to deal with the challenges. So it's a constantly evolving discipline, and it's not going to be, an authentication technology that fixes everything. It's not going to be a new operating system that fixes everything. There's no one tech or one change that we need to make.
It's an arms race as well, isn't it? Yeah, my
It
army
is
is way better than it was 20 years ago, but so is the people trying to get in.
Yeah, but I mean, we've won at certain things. I mean, the fact that we've got iPhones these days, or contemporary mobile devices, the only people who can reliably hack into them are nation states, paying millions of dollars for the tools that they need to do that, and that's a win. It's not a win unfortunately for the human rights defenders and journalists, some of whom have been killed after their phones have been hacked by some of these tools. It's not a win for them. But the fact that we've restricted the target set for the owners of those devices to such a narrow group of people is, even if you go back 10 years ago, it was unthinkable that we'd be able to achieve that. So there are certainly areas where we've won, but we just keep adding new technologies and new risks, and the industry just has to keep plugging away at those.
Yes. We spoke a little bit before in this, your take on banks. So banks, obviously seem like the biggest risk one, but I guess your thoughts on banks being effectively security companies.
Well, it was actually an executive at CBA, and I mean 20 years ago, who I had that conversation with. He was an ex-AFP guy, John Gertz, who no way would he be there now.
AFP, Australian Federal Police,
Australian Federal Police. And I remember having that conversation with him once, and he said, well, we're a security company, aren't we? That's how banks kind of started, is we'd take your money and we'd keep it safe in our safe. And, now the money's digital, and the way we have to keep it safe, the way we store it and keep it safe is different. So, I'd say the big four in Australia would be probably the most among the most capable organizations in Australia when it comes to managing their cybersecurity. They're quite good at it. Because it's in their DNA. They have to be. Yeah.
And it would seem that a lot of the smaller banks would tend to piggyback off a broader group anyway, in terms of I'm assuming there's not a lot of smaller banks have got sort of shared systems or across. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know too much about smaller banks in Australia. What I can tell you though is that, when you look at the US banking sector, it's just amazing that they're not having more trouble. Because, I mean, some of these banks over there, they run, that's Bob. He's got a bank. It's just incredible, the number of banks and credit unions over there. But certainly in Australia, the fact that we tend to have larger banks, bodes well. Because, security is something that it helps if you've got a bit of scale, because you need to throw a bit of money at it, right? So it's the bigger you are, in some ways it's easier, and in other ways it's harder because you've got more to defend. But you sort of want to be in the middle, I guess.
yeah. But I guess the message is, what you would traditionally think of as probably one of the most vulnerable sectors is probably doing the most, and as you said, I've got some of the most competent people out there.
Well, there's a difference between being the most vulnerable and being the most attacked. And
so in terms of listed, so if we're getting ourselves out of sort of hospitals and lawyers, which you said are sort of some of the key ones at the moment, in terms of listed companies, where do you think where do you see the most exciting news in terms of also from your perspective, the most headlining grabbing news? Which are the sectors which you'd be worried about?
What, in terms of attacker behavior?
In terms of being hacked, yeah.
Look, over the last few years, we've seen major incidents at JBS Meats that shut them down. We've seen the Colonial Pipeline. These are two of the biggest incidents in the last few years. One's meat processing, the other one's an oil pipeline.
Yeah.
And then we've got hospitals, and we've got Garmin, the wearable GPS, and, they got ransomware. They had to pay because the attack was existential for them. If they didn't pay, there was a question mark as to whether or not they would be able to recover. So we got GPS and, wearable tech, oil pipelines, meat processing, hospitals and law firms. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's anyone. It's anywhere where, these attackers might have a little bit of a poke around once they've got initial access and see, hey, we could do some damage here. That's the criteria. Profitable company, can disrupt operations, they'll pay. Or they have a good chance of paying. So I would just really caution people into thinking that this is a sector-specific threat, because it was. I mean, you would definitely have orgs like banks would be the ones that would really be, you would think would be targeted. But now it's like anyone who is profitable, has money, and needs to keep operating is a target.
Yeah, and so and I guess okay. In terms
you
of
see what I mean, right? Like it's
no.
yeah.
I guess I'm trying to going. Okay, well, there's certain companies that have got.
Like I wish I could sit here and say, oh, you need to really consider this as a portfolio risk in this vertical, but it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and it's
sorry.
and it does sound though as well that there's not a lot. There's some companies have a bit of a reputation for underspending, for example, on OT and say, what was it? The airline, one of the airlines that had a lot of problems, Southwest, I think last year, with then when all their systems started falling apart, and everyone was like, these guys have just got a reputation for never spending on IT, and so it's come back to bite them.
But some of it, I mean,
they weren't actually hacked. That was just them blowing it up themselves.
Some of it is sort of sector specific for that reason as well. So like hospitals, every dollar they spend on a security control is a dollar they're not spending on patient care. So they don't like spending a lot of money. So they tend to throw less of their margin goes into security than other organizations. Funnily enough, one that is historically underspent is superannuation funds.
Right.
And, because they're all operating on razor thin margins. So, I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen more drama affecting superannuation funds here in Australia. And that's another thing. Like, here's me saying, well, that seems to be an underprotected area, but nothing's happened. So what do I know? Basically, 22 years. Well, I have no idea.
Yeah, well, it's as I said, it could happen. It could happen quickly though as well.
That's right.
Like it's not and they're obviously sitting there with a lot of pretty key money for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think from my perspective, and we sort of don't like to. We go through. We have quite a long list of security measures we use ourselves, and we're like, well, do we actually tell people everything we do because that'll help ease their minds, or do we actually keep that quiet because the last thing we want to do is advertise to people?
Here's a list of the controls we use. Yeah,
here's a list of stuff you shouldn't try. Anything that's not on that list is something you should be trying.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard, right? And quite often it's not a case of just having a certain number of tools or controls. It's about having the people to operate them. Or, for smaller organizations, sometimes it's about having some sort of managed security service provider that can help you. So it's not necessarily about, in-house skills. I mean, I think that's an area where we're going to see growth, actually. Like if I was going to predict one area where we're going to see growth, it is going to be in managed security providers.
Yeah. Well, that was the part I was going to get to. Was the next part. Like, I mean, I know from, I started a research firm in 2000, and we had, all our servers ourselves and database guys to keep them up to date, and RAID arrays, and having to take, stuff home yourself, the backups yourself and stuff like that. And nowadays it's also Amazon and runs way better and all that type of stuff. And Amazon gives me this long list of security reports and issues. And, whenever anyone logs in with the root password, I get SMS and all this stuff like that, which is, way better than I could. Even if I had a staff of 2 or 3, it's way better than I could possibly imagine. We could produce out of that thing.
Sure, but if someone finds a vulnerability in your web application that is running in that infrastructure, it's not going to show up in your Amazon access logs. And your data's still gone.
It's not. But I guess it's this. I guess what's leading towards what you're saying in terms of it's the managed people who are basically saying around the idea that. If you're a smallish or even a medium-sized organization, actually some of these bigger companies are going to do a far better job of the security than you could ever hope to do.
Yes. And I think it's finally true. So for a long time, managed security providers were a compliance checkbox. So people never really expected to get value out of them. It's like, is someone monitoring your logs? And they get to check the box that says yes. And then they would outsource that function to the lowest bidder.
Right.
And usually bad things would happen to those companies. Often bad things would happen to those companies, but it's a compliance checkbox. And it was just a market that didn't incentivize greatness. Let's just say that. It was a market that existed for a long time to help people check boxes as opposed to actually delivering genuine value. That's changed. There's actually quite a few firms now in the managed what they now call the managed detection and response market that do quite work. I mean, quite good work, but it's expensive, right? And it's always that balance of like, well, it kind of needs to be expensive if it's going to be good, because you're talking about sharing access to a bunch of very highly paid specialists. But it is a market that I've watched evolve over a long period, and now I look at it and I see very intelligent people doing very good work instead of people who are just doing what did they call it? I had one guy called it log and flog.
Right.
That's what they used to call it, the log and flog market, which is just, get those logs in and, sell them a cheap contract and away you go. So I think there is hope for SMEs, basically.
And actually, just to explain for the non-tech guys, the logs we're talking about is basically anything happens on your server and stuff like that. There's somewhere there'll be a log of somebody accessed this, or somebody logged in with a password, or somebody went and changed some setting or something like that.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is that, it's fine to do that, but if nobody's actually looking and saying, it's more that you can come back and after you've been ransomware and go, oh, look, somebody's hacked our password and this is how they got in. And so, like, well, we could have told if we were actively watching it, we could have found this out, 3 weeks earlier and saved ourselves a lot of problems.
Yeah, they do save people. Like they have. I know of people who've worked at those companies, and they catch stuff and say, okay, wow, we need to shut that down. The funny thing is, though, the ones who are successful, like it's when they get their customers to tick the box that says they're allowed to actually do stuff when they see an incident unfolding in a customer's network. And a lot of people don't like ticking that box. Historically, they didn't like saying, oh, we're not going to give some third party the ability to do things on our network if there's an attack going on.
Yeah, that's right.
But that's the sensible choice, because otherwise you've got a managed service provider who is just sitting around watching their client getting progressively hacked worse and worse and unable to do anything and reach anyone on the phone. So,
yeah. Excellent. And tips for people to, in terms of their own investments, ways that to keep track of, ways they can avoid being hacked in terms of from an investment point of view. And
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, I guess in terms of so you've got your accounts. If you get an email from somebody saying, hey, we've we've just changed our account numbers and all that type of stuff. Can you update your records to stop depositing your money to this account and start depositing it somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, that's a giant red flag, right? Like that's something that people should be on the lookout for. Like we moved house 4 years ago, and I believe me when I was ringing up and double checking everyone's account numbers by phone. That is something that I always do. So that's a good thing to do. Is to usually have some sort of process for confirming things like account changes and account numbers that you're transacting with for the first time. That's something I'd recommend. And then just all of the usual good, cyber hygiene stuff that we talk about, like keep your computers up to date, patch them when there are security updates available for them, install them, particularly for your browsers and things like that. You want to make sure that your computer is in a reasonable state, and, get yourself some, basic antivirus software and whatnot, and you should, be okay. And use multi-factor authentication wherever you can. So, and just be wary that some of that stuff can be phished. I protect my accounts with a hardware security key, but that might be a little bit overkill for just the average person at this point. But you can use passkeys now with your Gmail account. So I would say people should use the strongest form of authentication wherever they can. Keep their computers up to date, run antivirus software, and always be of the mind that anyone cold calling you is probably not who they say they are, and anyone emailing you and asking you to do things with money probably also not who they say they are.
No, I've got my yes. That goes out to my father as well. I keep trying to explain to him that your own kids don't want to help fix your IT problems. Strangers calling up over the internet definitely don't want to.
Yeah.
So yes.
Okay, we're just going to go to a quick sales message. We'll be back again shortly. If you like what you're hearing but want a low-cost passive option, Nucleus Wealth is the first to offer passive direct indexing in Australia. The first generation of passive investing was index funds. The next gen was ETFs. Now direct indexing is here with significantly more customization and control. The benefit of direct indexing is you can add or subtract investment themes, and we have almost 100 different options to choose from. For example, you could buy an international share direct index portfolio that excludes fossil fuels and arms manufacturers and has a tilt towards cybersecurity and cloud computing. Alternatively, you could buy a portfolio with no screens and an extra exposure to nuclear power and defense contractors. You can find out more at nucleuswealth.com. Now back to the show. Now we have our question of the week. So this is for viewers to have some discussion in the comment section over the coming days. So the question for this week is, what is the biggest AI threat in cybersecurity? So feel free to post your thoughts and engage with us and some of the other viewers over the coming days. So Damo, now over to you for investment implications.
Yeah, I'll have to, and I'm going to do quite an abbreviated one of this because I was, I guess what I was hoping to get out of this was that, like, okay, yeah, I've thought about some of these sectors, and these ones seem like they're underspending versus other ones, and they've got the characteristics that you'd expect that I don't know, what might be, say, utility sector, for example. There's some of the characteristics that people want to hack them, and as we spoke about pipelines and stuff like that, and they probably don't spend a lot on IT, but yeah, I'll need to have a bit of a longer think because, as Patrick has said on several occasions, it's not any one particular sector. It's now a lot. It's been democratized.
Yes.
Where,
malicious behavior and crime has been democratized.
Yeah, that's right.
Good news, everyone.
Yeah, exactly. and the other problem, obviously, is that it is hard to tell when people are underspending. You can do it a little bit, and we spend a bit of time. That's why we'll talk to companies and competitors and things like that, and you get an idea when people are underspending. But sometimes companies look like they're underspending, but actually that's just because they're actually pretty good at what they're doing. And there's other ones that look like they're overspending, but it's because they've bought 4 different companies and they're running 4 different IT systems that probably should be one. But they can't do it, and so
well, it's not just about money. So that's absolutely right. It's not.
Yeah.
You can't just throw money at something and expect it to improve.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, I'll cross to Sam.
Just one thing I just want to add as well is with our screens and tilts. So we do have a cybersecurity tilt. So if you think this is going to be a growing industry over the coming years, you can put an extra exposure into any of your portfolios for cybersecurity.
So that's a group of the sort of top 8 largest cybersecurity companies in the world.
So that pretty much wraps us up for today. So Patrick, just want to say thank you so much. We've all learned something today, and it's going to be a pretty interesting sector over the coming next 2 decades. So thanks for your time and thanks for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Cheers, guys. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks. And Patrick, do you want to give a quick wrap to where people can get more information for you?
Oh, look, I mean, if people want to check out the podcast, it's called Risky.BIZ. It's pretty easy to find, but we are pretty deep in the weeds. And unless you work in the discipline, you're probably going to find about 40% of it absolutely baffling. But people can go check it out if they'd like.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Patrick. So if you know of anyone that might get some value out of today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you do share it with them. That wraps us up for today. So for myself, Damien, and Patrick, thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.